All right, let's get back to our exit interviews. We're two young stud defensemen who are up and coming are on the books today. Let's start with the one who played more NHL games this season and has played more NHL games over the last couple of years. It's Jacob Bernard Docker. Now, this is an interesting one for me because the numbers are never going to be what jumps off the page for Jacob Bernard Docker. In the NHL this year, he played 19 games, had 1 lone assist, and played 16 minutes and 1 second per game. The expected goals percentage, which takes into account different shot attempts with the high danger of them, scoring opportunities, 50.5, whereas the shot attempts for versus against at 5-on-5 when he was on the ice, 49.6. Pilsy, this one's interesting. The fans gave him a C. 61.5% gave him a C, which I would believe to be adequate. What would you describe Jacob Bernard Docker's season as last year?
I think it was another step towards where he's trying to be, right? If you're looking at Jacob Bernard Docker's NHL career right now, his first taste was just 5 games in 2021. Then he had 8 games in 21-22. And now you bump that all the way up to 19 games. He got a little bit more of an idea of what that's like. He got to play with different partners. He was with Thomas Chabot for most of the time. And then near the end of the season, Jacob Bernard Docker and our next exit interview guy, Tyler Clevin, they got to play a bunch on the bottom pair. So it's really interesting to see how they're integrating JBD into this NHL lineup. And you mentioned it, the points just, that doesn't tell the story about Jacob Bernard Docker. And ironically, Ross, he had that assist in his first game, and then he went 18 straight games without a point.
I'll take that a step further. His first point was 50 seconds into the first game he played this year.
Well, at least he got that monkey off his back real soon, eh? Now he can just kind of relax there.
It was a secondary assist on a Drake Batherson goal where Alex DeBrincat had the other assist. Yeah, 50 seconds into the first period. Funny we're doing this conversation today because that was the first game that Ryan Reynolds was at, the Vancouver game.
Oh, true.
So funny enough how that all comes full circle. But yeah, with JBD, I think the best thing I can say about his game this year is that he didn't look overwhelmed when he was going to pick up pucks in his own zone. I felt like sometimes the forecheck would get to him last year, and even in that 5-game sample, but more so last year, where he became a little more timid. Whereas this year, I think physically, he's definitely a big, strong kid, and I think that he's starting to realize that he can match up in terms of strength with other forwards on other teams, and he's willing to take contact behind his own net and then make a quick shovel pass. Whereas before, I think he was kind of hurrying and maybe trying to get rid of the puck a little bit too fast. Whereas I still see an NHL, like this guy will be an NHL defenseman. I just have a little bit of trouble figuring out what the timeline is for him to be that. Like, does he need more time in Belleville? Does he need to be an AHLer? He needs waivers next year, which is where things get really interesting. But to finish up my thoughts on last year before we move forward, an RFA here needs a new contract. Like, do you think that he could still be that complimentary top 4 defenseman where he's just going to kind of defer? Maybe not in Ottawa. We talked about the top 4 is pretty locked in here now. But before, right, that was always the thing. It's like, oh, he could be like the Mathot type where it's like he'll make a good offensive defenseman better because he's so steady and just Ison is very calm as a partner. So that's why I'm trying to figure out, though, like where does he fit in?
Yeah, and it's interesting, especially now with the way this decor shapes up. And Ross, we've mentioned it, at least I'll speak for myself. I've mentioned it multiple times that I've always seen JBD as the piece to the puzzle for Thomas Chabot's defense partner. Because you said it, he's not going to get points. He's not going to be flashy. He's not going to do highlight reel plays. But he's going to allow his partner to have the space to do that. And we got to see Thomas Chabot and Jacob Bernard Docker actually play together for a decent sample size, Ross. 10 games, 128 minutes. Unfortunately, I wouldn't say it was a smashing success as their Corsi 4 percentage was 45.02. But also, you have to kind of take that with a grain of salt. You're asking a young defenseman to come up and play top minutes right there. So not only are you playing a lot of minutes, but you're playing up against other teams' biggest threats offensively. So that definitely can be a tough challenge for Jacob Bernard Docker. I'm not so convinced that he's still that golden boy partner for Thomas Chabot, just because, like you mentioned, unfortunately, contractually, this is going to be a very interesting season. He needs a new contract and he needs waivers if he's going to be sent down. So I don't know where Jacob Bernard-Docker fits, Ross, not only on this team next year, but in this franchise, because he's played a lot of games in Belleville. And maybe I'll pass this off to you and get your opinion on it. But does he have more to prove in Belleville, or did he not prove enough in Belleville? I really can't decide.
He's a game short of 100 AHL games between this year and last. And just from talking to Footy, talking to other guys, it seems like he's kind of been that top pair, reliable, defer to your partner to do offense guy down there. And it's interesting because in college, that's what he was as well. But then in his final season as a junior, his third year, he exploded offensively as well. And you're like, oh, is he going to take another step? Like, will he do more in the offensive zone than just kind of feather pucks on net? Like, can he cycle a little bit? Can he move around? Can he hold the line a little bit more solidly? But it just feels like it's almost like that. He knows what he's good at, and he just wants to be really good at that instead of kind of being that all-around defenseman. And that's where it's going to kind of pigeonhole him into only being able to be effective in certain situations. And again, probably not with a guy like Tyler Kleven, who would be a kind of a more stabilizer type guy back there as well. And then you have Jacob Chicker, so you don't really need the guys to be a Chabot partner or something like that anyway. So to answer your question, I'd say he's probably proven enough in Belleville to take the next step. But is he going to be an NHLer this year? Or is he going to be one of those like quadruple A guys, to steal a baseball reference, where like you're too good for triple A, but you struggle in the majors, right? It's one level, but it's such a big jump. And it's about getting comfortable, but also having the opportunity to get enough reps to be doing that. And I mean, he averaged 16 minutes a game. So when he was in the NHL, it's not like he was sitting on the bench like he was in his first season. Or no, even then he did play a decent amount, but wasn't like he was a number 7 guy just sitting on the bench waiting for PKs or to get out there. So I don't know. This guy, this is a very interesting storyline because they used a first-round pick for him. They traded back to get another asset. Rangers go up and take Keandre Miller, who's been an absolute star in the NHL. So you're like, okay, what are you seeing in Jacob Bernard-Docker? This guy was drafted the same year as Brady Tkachuk. Like, how long before you allow him to blossom before it's like, okay, we got to make tough decisions here. The depth on this team is where it hasn't been since you've been in the organization. So how are you going to come to camp next year and make it impossible for us to put you on waivers? Because we talk about Lassie signed for next year. JBD's not. I don't know if that's going to impact anything, but it's a guy you might have to put on waivers if he doesn't impress at camp.
And he's got his work cut out for him now, because now we just talked about Eric Brandstrom and Travis Hamnick in yesterday's episode, and those guys have a considerable leg up on JBD as far as it goes to making the NHL roster. And Ross, it's funny you mentioned, like I talked about how I thought JBD was going to be Thomas Chabot's partner. That didn't really work out. And then you mentioned that, well, it's also kind of awkward because you feel like if he's paired with Tyler Kleven, neither of those guys really excel at moving the puck up. But you look at it, Tyler Kleven was Jacob Bernard-Docker's next most ice time partner with 51 minutes and 28 seconds. And their Corsi 4 was a whopping 65.66%. Wow. But now keep in mind, that's going from top pair minutes to bottom pair minutes. So, and if you look at Jacob Bernard's game logs, Ross, it's very apparent which games he played with Thomas Chabot and which games he played with Tyler Kleven. But they were able to have success together as a pair on the bottom pair there. So that's something interesting where maybe it's not so much that Jacob Bernard-Docker has kind of fallen out of place in this organization as much as it needs to be a rebranding, and expectations need to be tempered on what he can do.
So he needs one more season of pro hockey before being arbitration eligible. So I would imagine that this would mean he needs to have a great camp, and it's just kind of going to come to that. But I think he signs a 2-way contract, 1 year, 2-way, NHL money, maybe $200,000 at the AHL level, maybe give him a little extra cookie there, or you make the AHL money higher if you do still believe that he's going to be an NHL, maybe give him a lot, and then maybe that helps him clear waivers if another team isn't going to bite because of that. But you know what? If he earns a spot in the NHL and there's no room in Ottawa, I hope that he does find success, because we had him on the show. Great guy, really like salt of the earth type guy. And I think that he will have an NHL career. I really do. So I'm hoping for good things for Jacob Bernard-Docker. And it'd be great if it ends up being on the Sens blue line.
Now, let me ask you this, and then we'll move on to Tyler Kleven. Do you believe there's a path for him to outwork Travis Hamonic?
Well,
Hamonic
there right now. Not that I'm saying I do think he comes back, but
I'm making the assumption he's back. Yeah,
he's going to have to beat out Hamonic and maybe Kleven as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Lefty, but Kleven played the right side a considerable amount. So, you know what he does need, Pills? He needs to have a huge summer and come in and make the team have no choice but to keep him. It's going to be fun. I'm really excited for this because, man, we've obviously been following them since North Dakota. Like 18 points in 27 games last year. North Dakota, he even helped Canada at the World Championships and playing against men as a 20-year-old. We're like, okay, let's go. Let's see you take the next step. And it's just been a slow grind. And he's still only 22 years old. He'll be 23 at the end of June. This is the year for him. This is the make or break, at least in the Sens organization. Not in his pro career. I still think he'll be a pro, but this might be a make or break season for Jacob Bernard-Docker with the Sens.